So I guess you could say I've always been the odd one out in my family. Hey, I'm Michael, and I'm 27 years old now. I've got two siblings, Sarah, my older sister, and Chris, my younger brother. If you ever wanted a case study in favoritism, just look at how my parents treated them versus me. Sarah and Chris were basically worshipped, while I was just there. Sarah was the golden child from the start. Straight A's, valedictorian, homecoming queen, you name it, she nailed it. She went off to some fancy Ivy League college that my parents couldn't stop bragging about. I'm talking non-stop. They even threw her this massive party when her acceptance letter came in, like it was Christmas in the middle of the year. I still remember standing in the corner of that celebration, wondering if they even noticed I existed. Chris wasn't much different. He followed right in Sarah's footsteps, effortlessly gliding through school and landing in some prestigious grad program. My parents set him up just like they did with Sarah. They paid his tuition, helped him move, and even bought him a new laptop. They made sure every little thing was handled. And then there was me. No Ivy League, no grand plans. I went to a decent state college, which I was proud of, but when I told my parents I got accepted, they barely looked up from their dinner. "That's great, Michael," they said without even a flicker of excitement. There was no party, no special celebration. Heck, we didn't even order takeout. It was just nothing. That's when I started realizing the gap between me and my siblings wasn't just about school, it was everything. It wasn't long before I started feeling the sting of being the forgotten son. Take Sarah's wedding, for example. My parents shelled out $200,000 for it. You read that right, 200 grand. They went all out, venue, catering, flights for out-of-state family, the works. It was like a royal event. And Chris? Oh, they paid for his entire graduate degree and even helped with his rent afterward. Meanwhile, when I was trying to start my career and needed some work tools, something crucial to even get going, I asked for help. They gave me $7,000. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm grateful, but when you stack that up against the hundreds of thousands they spent on Sarah and Chris, it kind of stings. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was just an afterthought, getting whatever was left over so they could feel like they helped. Every time we had a family dinner, I felt like the odd one out. Conversations were always about Sarah's next big project or Chris's fancy vacation. They'd sit there talking about their luxurious lives while I was just sitting there, struggling to think of something to add. The worst part, no one seemed to notice. They didn't realize that I wasn't part of the conversation, or maybe they did, but just didn't care. One dinner in particular stands out. It was about a year ago. We were all sitting around, and as usual, Sarah was talking about her vacation plans. Some trip to Europe that my parents were, of course, helping to fund. Chris chimed in, casually mentioning how they had helped with his wedding expenses too. And there was Emily, laughing about how grateful she was for not having to worry about tuition because our parents had covered everything. I sat there quietly eating my food, feeling my frustration bubbling up inside me. And then it just slipped out. I muttered under my breath, "Must be nice." The room went dead silent. Sarah, with that perfect mix of confusion and annoyance, turned to me. "What's that supposed to mean, Michael?" she asked, like she genuinely couldn't fathom why I was upset. That's when I lost it. "It means," I started, trying to keep my cool, "that not all of us get everything handed to us on a silver platter. Some of us actually have to work for what we need." Chris, ever the dismissive one, leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Didn't Mom and Dad help you get those tools for work?" That hit a nerve. Sure, they gave me $7,000, but I couldn't let it go unchallenged. "Yeah, they helped, but $7,000 compared to hundreds of thousands? It's not the same, and you know it." My voice shook as I spoke, the bitterness clear as day. Mom, always the peacekeeper, tried to smooth things over. "Michael, we thought that's what you needed. We've always tried to give you what's fair." I could barely contain myself. "Fair? You think this is fair? You've given them everything. You've practically paved their roads for them while I've had to build mine brick by brick." From there, the conversation spiraled out of control. Everyone defended themselves, acting like I was the problem, like I was being dramatic. Dad shook his head, trying to brush it off. "You're blowing this out of proportion." I stood up, unable to take it anymore. My chair scraped against the floor as I pushed it back, and without another word, I walked out of the house. Their voices followed me out the door, but I didn't look back. I was done being the forgotten one. As I stormed down the driveway, my heart pounded in my chest. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I needed to get away. Far away. That night I just walked. No real destination in mind, just a need to get as far away from that house as possible. The streets were quiet, and everything felt unnervingly still, like the whole world had paused while I tried to piece together what just happened. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. I knew it was one of them. Probably Emily, trying to smooth things over, but I wasn't ready to deal with that. My feet carried me to this park not far from the house. I used to go there as a kid when things got too heavy at home. It was my escape, a place to breathe. I sat down on an old wooden bench tucked away in the corner by some trees, staring up at the stars. Normally, the night sky calms me down, but not tonight. My mind was racing, replaying that dinner over and over. Sarah, Chris, my parents, they didn't get it. They never would. For them, life had always been smooth sailing. They had their futures handed to them, while I had to claw my way up, scraping by to make a name for myself. And no matter how hard I tried, I always ended up feeling like I didn't belong in that family, like I was the outsider, an afterthought. It wasn't just about the money, though. I realized that sitting there on that bench, the money was just a symptom of the bigger problem. The real issue was how I'd spent my whole life feeling like I wasn't enough. Like no matter what I did, it was never going to compare to what Sarah and Chris had done. I didn't need a fancy Ivy League degree or a six-figure wedding. What I needed was to feel seen, to feel like I mattered. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Emily. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. "Michael, where are you?" she asked, her voice calm but with that usual tone like she was the one in control, the one who knew best. "It doesn't matter," I replied flatly. "I'm not coming back tonight." "Come on, you're being ridiculous. We're family. We need to talk this out," she said, like talking was going to magically fix years of being overlooked. I let out a bitter laugh. "Talk? You mean like we always do? Where I get told I should be grateful for what little I've got, while you all pat yourselves on the back for being such great siblings? That's not fair," she shot back, clearly uncomfortable now. "We didn't know you felt like this." I could feel my frustration rising again. "How could you not know, Emily? Every time we get together, it's all about Sarah and Chris. You get the trips, the houses, the weddings, and I get whatever's left over. I'm tired of pretending it doesn't bother me." She didn't say anything for a moment, and I could hear the background noise of the house. Laughter, clinking dishes. Like nothing had even happened, like my outburst had been some blip on their perfect evening. "Just come back," she finally said, her voice softer now. "We'll figure it out." But I wasn't ready to figure anything out with them, not yet. "I need time," I muttered, before hanging up. I stuffed my phone back in my pocket, leaning back against the bench. The wind had picked up, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me as the chill started to settle in. It was late and the park was empty, but I wasn't ready to go back home. Not yet. I needed space. Space to think. Space to breathe. Space to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I sat there for what felt like hours, going over everything in my head. How had it come to this? How had I ended up being the black sheep in a family that should have loved and supported me just as much as my siblings? It wasn't like I had ever asked for much. All I wanted was to be treated the same, to feel like I mattered as much as they did. But no matter how hard I worked, no matter what I achieved, it was never enough. Eventually, I made my way back to my apartment, though I wasn't sure how much time had passed. I barely slept that night. My mind was racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that things would never change unless I made them change. That realization hit hard. I couldn't keep waiting for my family to wake up and see how unfair things had been. They weren't going to. It was up to me now. I had to do something about it, but I wasn't even sure where to start. Part of me wanted to just cut ties completely, walk away for good, but I knew that wasn't the answer. Despite everything, they were still my family. As messed up as it was, I didn't want to walk away completely. I just wanted things to be different. The next morning, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring out the window at the quiet street below. Everything felt clearer now, though it wasn't any easier. I knew I had to confront them again, but this time, I needed to be ready. I wasn't going to go in blind. No, this time I was going to lay it all out for them in a way they couldn't ignore. I spent the rest of the morning digging through old bank statements, emails, and any receipts I could find. I had the proof. I had the numbers to show just how wide the gap between me and my siblings really was. It wasn't going to be pretty, but at least they wouldn't be able to dismiss me as dramatic or jealous this time. By the time I finished putting everything together, it was late afternoon, and I was mentally and emotionally drained. But I had what I needed now. I had the proof that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't imagining things. They had favored Sarah and Chris, and now I had the receipts to prove it. The next family dinner was already on the calendar. Emily's birthday. The timing wasn't ideal, but when was there ever a good time for this? I wasn't about to wait another year, hoping things would magically get better. No, I was done waiting. The day of Emily's birthday dinner arrived, and I could feel the tension building in my chest. I had all my documents ready, the emails, the receipts, the bank statements, everything that showed how much my parents had poured into Sarah and Chris, and how little they had done for me. I wasn't trying to ruin Emily's birthday, but honestly, when was there ever a perfect time for this conversation? When I arrived at my parents' house, everything seemed normal, like the blow-up from the last dinner had never even happened. My mom was bustling around the kitchen, finishing up the meal, while my dad was outside grilling, his usual routine. Emily was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, oblivious to what was about to go down. She looked up when she saw me and smiled. "Hey, Michael, you good?" she asked, like everything was fine, like we hadn't just had a huge family argument. "Yeah, I'm fine," I replied, though the knot in my stomach told a different story. I wasn't fine. My heart was racing, and I could feel the weight of the folder I had brought with me, full of the proof I needed to lay everything out on the table. Sarah and Chris showed up not long after, laughing and chatting like always. The carefree, golden children, without a worry in the world. I sat through the first part of dinner quietly, barely touching my food. The usual conversations flowed. Sarah talking about her latest vacation plans, Chris cracking jokes about how expensive weddings were, Emily chiming in with her own stories. Meanwhile, I just sat there waiting for the right moment to speak. Finally, after we had finished eating and everyone was settling into dessert, I put my fork down and cleared my throat. "I need to talk to you all," I said, my voice steady, even though I was anything but calm inside. All eyes turned to me, confusion spreading across their faces. My dad raised an eyebrow. "What's up, Michael?" I took a deep breath and pulled out the folder, laying it on the table. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened the other night," I started, "and I realized that I've never really laid it all out for you. I've been carrying this around for years, and it's time you understand why I feel the way I do." My mom looked concerned, glancing at the folder like it was something dangerous. "Michael, can't we just enjoy the evening? It's Emily's birthday." "I know," I interrupted, trying to keep my tone calm. "And I'm sorry, but there's never going to be a good time for this. I need you all to listen." I stood up and walked over to the living room, hooking up my laptop to the TV. Everyone was watching me now, confused, unsure of what was coming. I clicked through the folders on my desktop, pulling up the presentation I had spent the last few days putting together. It wasn't fancy, just a slideshow with numbers, dates, and screenshots of documents. The first slide was a simple chart showing how much my parents had spent on each of us for education. Sarah's name was at the top, followed by Chris, then Emily. My name sat at the bottom with a number so low it almost felt embarrassing. Chris leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What is this?" "This," I said, keeping my voice steady, "is what I've been dealing with. This is how much you spent on Sarah's college tuition. This is how much you spent on Chris's grad school. And here's Emily's tuition, all covered by you guys." I paused for a moment, letting the numbers sink in. Sarah and Chris exchanged awkward glances, but no one said anything. "And this," I continued, clicking to the next slide, "is how much you gave me. $7,000 for tools. That's it. No tuition help, no house down payment, no wedding fund. Just $7,000. The room was silent. I could see the gears turning in their heads as they tried to process what they were seeing. My mom looked like she was on the verge of tears, and my dad was frowning, clearly not happy with where this was going. "Michael," my mom started, her voice trembling, "we thought that was what you needed." "I'm not saying you didn't help me," I cut her off, trying to stay calm. "But you can't sit there and tell me this is fair. Look at the difference. You gave them everything they needed to get ahead, and I got scraps." My dad sighed and leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "We gave you what we thought you needed, Michael. You didn't ask for help with school." I could feel my frustration bubbling up again. "I didn't ask because I knew you wouldn't offer," I shot back. "I shouldn't have to beg to get the same support Sarah and Chris got. You just handed it to them without thinking twice." Sarah, who had been quiet up until now, finally spoke. "Michael, why are you bringing this up now? We never knew you felt like this." "Because every time I tried to bring it up, you all brushed me off," I said, the frustration creeping into my voice. "Every time I hinted that maybe things weren't as fair as you thought, you told me I was overreacting or being dramatic. But it's not about the money. It's about how you've made me feel like I don't matter as much as you." Emily, who had been picking at her food, looked down, clearly uncomfortable. "I didn't know it was this bad," she mumbled, almost to herself. "That's the point," I said, closing the presentation. "None of you knew because none of you bothered to look. You were all too busy living your perfect lives, and I was just there trying to keep my head above water." The room fell silent again. My mom wiped at her eyes with a tissue, and my dad still looked frustrated, but no one argued. For the first time, it felt like they were actually listening. "I'm not asking for an apology," I said, breaking the silence. "I just wanted you to see what I've been dealing with. I wanted you to understand why I feel the way I do." No one said anything for a while. The tension in the room was thick, but for the first time I felt like maybe, just maybe, they were starting to understand, Dot. Sarah cleared her throat, looking serious for once. "I didn't realize it was this bad," she said quietly. "We should have seen it sooner." Chris, still looking uncomfortable, finally nodded. "Yeah, maybe we can figure something out." Mom and Dad exchanged a glance. For the first time, it felt like we were on the same page, or at least heading in the right direction. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. This wasn't going to fix everything. Years of feeling like the forgotten one weren't going to disappear overnight. But maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something better, Dot. After that dinner, things didn't magically get better overnight. My family still had their habits, their ways of seeing things, but at least the air had cleared a bit. We all left the house that night knowing things had to change, even if no one quite knew how. I'd said my piece, and they had listened, at least for once. But honestly, that wasn't enough for me. Not anymore. I was tired. Tired of being the afterthought, the one who always had to accept less while they got more. I realized that I couldn't keep waiting for them to treat me differently. If I wanted things to change, I had to change them myself. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I walked away, Dot. It wasn't a dramatic exit, no big speeches or tearful goodbyes. I just stopped trying, stopped reaching out, stopped putting myself in situations where I knew I'd end up feeling like I didn't belong. For the first time in my life, I put myself first, Dot. And you know what? It worked. I started throwing myself into my career, focusing on building the life I wanted without waiting for anyone else's approval. I didn't need their validation anymore. I knew my worth, even if they never saw it, Dot. It wasn't easy at first. Walking away from your family isn't something you can just do without feeling the weight of it. There were nights when I questioned myself, wondering if I was making a mistake. But the more I distanced myself, the more I realized how much energy I had wasted trying to win their approval. And without that constant weight on my shoulders, I was free to finally focus on me, Dot. And let me tell you, I thrived. I threw myself into my work, building my business from the ground up. At first, it was just about surviving, making sure I could pay my bills and keep my head above water. But soon, things started to take off. I grew my business, hired a team, and built something I could be proud of. It wasn't just about money, though that was nice too. It was about proving to myself that I could do it. That I didn't need anyone else to make it happen. Years passed, and the success I found wasn't something I ever imagined for myself. Clients came pouring in, my reputation grew, and suddenly I was the one people looked to for guidance, for help. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of being overlooked, I was the one who had made something of myself. I was the one who had it all together, without any of them. But then, just as I was settling into this new phase of my life, the past came knocking. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in a long time. My mom. We hadn't spoken in years, and part of me wanted to ignore the call, to keep the distance I had worked so hard to create. But something in me told me to answer. "Michael," she started, her voice softer than I remembered, almost fragile. "We need to talk." I hesitated. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear whatever it was she had to say, but curiosity got the better of me. "What's going on? Can we meet? In person?" she asked. "Your dad and I? We really need to see you." I wasn't sure what to make of it. The last time we spoke, things had ended with them denying everything, brushing off my concerns like they were no big deal. But something in her voice sounded different, desperate, almost. "Okay," I finally agreed. We made plans to meet at a cafe later that week. When I walked into the cafe, I immediately noticed them sitting by the window, looking out of place. My dad, who always seemed so confident, so sure of himself, looked tired. His shoulders slumped, and his usual arrogance had been replaced with a kind of weariness I'd never seen before. My mom looked older, thinner, like the years had caught up to her all at once. "Michael, thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. There was no warmth in her voice, no excitement, just exhaustion. "Yeah, sure," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "What's going on?" They exchanged a look, and I could feel the weight of whatever they were about to tell me. My dad cleared his throat, speaking first. "Your siblings, they've cut contact with us," he said quietly. I blinked, not sure if I'd heard him right. "What do you mean?" "Sarah and Chris," my mom chimed in, her voice shaky. "They don't talk to us anymore. Sarah moved away with her husband, and she won't return our calls. Chris, well, he's distanced himself too. And Emily, we haven't heard from her in months." I sat there, processing what they were saying. It didn't make sense. Sarah and Chris had always been the golden children, the ones my parents doted on. Now they were the ones who had walked away? "We're struggling, Michael," my mom continued. "Financially, emotionally. We don't know what to do." And there it was, the real reason they wanted to meet. They needed help. After years of pushing me aside, of treating me like an afterthought, they were coming to me, asking for help because their golden children had left them behind. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant, like this was some kind of twisted karma, but I didn't. I didn't feel satisfaction or vindication. Instead, I just felt tired. "So what do you want from me?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "We were hoping," my dad started, avoiding eye contact, "that maybe you could help us out. We know things haven't been great between us, but we're really in a tough spot right now, financially." Of course, it was about the money. I should have seen that coming. I looked between the two of them, wondering if they even realized how ridiculous this all was. The same parents who had told me to be happy with what I got were now asking me for help because their favorites had ditched them. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I mean, you made it pretty clear a few years ago that I wasn't your priority, and now you're asking me to help because Sarah and Chris don't want to?" They looked at each other, and for the first time I saw something I'd never seen before: regret. Real, genuine regret. "We know we messed up, Michael," my mom said softly. "We should have treated you better. We didn't realize it until it was too late." I didn't say anything for a while. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive them, to be the bigger person. But another part of me, the part that had spent years feeling overlooked and undervalued, wasn't ready to let go of all that hurt. "I'll think about it," I finally said, standing up to leave. "But I'm not making any promises." As I walked out of the cafe, I realized something. I didn't owe them anything. Not anymore. Story 2. Dad moved in with his wife and 2 children after secretly getting married. They believe they now own the property. Living in the large, ancient house my mother left me when she died away when I was just 16, I am a 25-year-old woman. This isn't simply any house. It's an ancestral home that has belongings and memories from several generations of my family. A few months ago, my 52-year-old dad and his friends took this vacation, and when he returned home, he had a surprise. Steph, his 51-year-old high school love, and he were married. They had been communicating covertly for about 2 years. I had no idea what was going on, had no idea he was seeing someone. The next thing I know, Steph and my 2 stepsisters, let's just call them Lizzie and Lexi, have moved in. Not to mention their 2 Kiowas, of course, Hermes and Gucci. Yes, they really go by such names. The twins, who are 20 years old and enrolled in a local public college, thought that by living here rather than on campus or renting someplace else, they might save some money. With 7 bedrooms, more than 8 bathrooms, a basement, and a poolside yard, the house is undoubtedly spacious enough. But since they moved there, problems have kept coming up one after another. The legendary room shuffle comes first. Steph determined she needed additional closet space for her high-end purses and other items. Whose room has the second largest closet, you ask? Yes, my. In fact, she recommended that I downsize to a smaller room. That one gets my foot down. Told her the truth. I quote, "V had this room all my life, and I have no intention of moving out of it when I buy a house." To defuse the situation, my dad offered to divide the space in my closet between Steph's belongings and his possessions in a separate room. Give in, I suppose. The twins are the next in line. Absolute absence of limits. Since COVID is the reason I work from home, my home office is a place of holiness. Apparently, Lexi missed the memo. I was at a business meeting when she stormed into my office wearing a bikini. With the camera turned on, everyone followed me closely, completely unaware of the disastrous situation she was creating for her career. Enough said about being embarrassed. And there is the matter of their dogs. Hermes and Gucci aren't even housebroken. The twins don't bother tidying up after them. And they scatter little surprises all over the area. These canines are cruel in addition to being dirty. In particular to Moxie, my Cocker Spaniel. One of their nips ended up leaving a scratch on her arm. Not nice. And this wild cake's frosting. They made the wise decision to relocate all of the family portraits, pictures of my mother, my great-grandparents, my grandparents, and even my infant up in the attic without my consent. Simply removed all of these memories and put them elsewhere as if they had no significance. After spending a whole day returning everything to its proper place, it happened once more a few days later. 2 days ago, staff members repeated the action, but this time, she substituted her images with those of her family, the twins, and herself. Stefan. I got into a furious fight about it. I informed her that her daughter needed to learn how to knock on doors and educate their dogs to use the toilet, and that she could not make any changes to the decor or other aspects of my home without my permission. She claimed they were free to do as they pleased in her home and that she would be creating house rules that we would all have to abide by. Since she believes that I am such a feral beast, I can do everything I want. To say I was furious would be an understatement given that I was reared improperly as a result of having a horrible, ineffective mother. I told her that because I'm kicking around, she should pack her stuff and bring her twins. I don't have the authority to force them to leave her home, she replied. I informed her, "You are living under my house, lady, and I quote, 'This is my home. It's something my mother gave me. You, your twins, and your pets are trespassing right now. Before I contact the police, get out.'" That day, once Steph informed my dad what had happened, he left early for home. I gave him my version of events. I said that they were still adjusting to the new residence, which was challenging for them. I told him everything that was wrong with them, but he insisted that we should simply give them some time and that everything would get better. "I've put up with all of their nonsense, but enough is enough," I told him. "It's enough." He was siding with them and protecting them more. I gave him till the end of the week to decide whether to move out with them or stay. Did I make the correct decision by forcing my dad to choose between his new family and me? I really did give them an opportunity. And for the past few months, I've endured so much of their horrible behavior, which is regrettable because my mother was my breaking point. She would never disrespect her home, which is where both she and I were raised. It's a good idea for you to check the top comments before reading the latest versions. Exactly what came to mind first, giving a nod of agreement. All right, they have a horrible voice. You did what you had to do, girl, and I would have done the same. Conversely, your father needs to get a backbone. She seemed to have him firmly grasped in her grasp. I doubt that getting married without inviting you was even his idea. Simply remove them if that is his decision. Proceed. Not in contact. That type of poison is not what you need in your life. Make sure he is unable to dispute her inheritance of the house in order for them to remain there. People these days. You know, hope things works out well for you. Don't tell the wife about the covert wedding. For 2 years, Daddy Dearest dated, concealing it so well that Obiano had no idea. Even though she came up with this concept, my darling father was fully in favor of it. Indeed, it's ridiculous how entitled you, your father's wife, and your stepdaughters are. I'm so happy you got rid of them. Her father is also acting in a really bad way. Everything was done in groups. I tied the knot. Didn't inform you? And oh, in my new family too. Take up residence. He is not being honest, polite, or respectful. If the stepmother had suggested the wedding, I would be shocked. It's especially important not to invite the man's daughter. What the heck is that? First edit. Hi everyone, I really appreciate all of your support and comments. It is quite beneficial, particularly amid all of this chaos. Because I detest confrontation, there are moments when I worry that I come across as a pushover. I'm just not into fighting or arguing. You know, I'd rather keep the peace. So here's some quick information on the situation. A few of you made the really wise suggestion to change the locks on the various rooms in the house. Additionally, I haven't had time to fix the old rusted gate at the property that has been hanging open forever. Perhaps it's time to investigate that as well. In order to find out if there is a possibility that my dad would try to contest the will, I actually gave the attorney who handled my mom's estate a call. We quote, re-hoping for a successful outcome from our meeting in a few hours. About my dad. Look, he's a good guy. He worked hard to provide for me after my mom passed away. He's never dipped into my funds or asked for financial help for living expenses. He's an engineer, makes a good 6-figure salary, so I don't really think he's after my money, but I guess he's just caught up in the fact that someone from his past still finds him attractive at his age. We had a chat about his sudden wedding and why he kept his relationship secret. He told me he wasn't sure how I'd react to him dating his high school sweetheart. To be honest, I was pretty upset at first, especially since I wasn't even invited to the wedding. But I'm trying to get over it since he seems happy. But as for his wife and what her deal is, whether there's any bad blood from the past with my mom or something else that's making her act this way, I don't really know. And I'm not sure I want to dive into that mess. They quote, re-adults. They can handle their own issues. And if they ever run into money trouble, they've got their collection of luxury bags to sell off. Seriously, who needs so many bags that they require a whole closet just to store them? In terms of family, it's pretty much just me and my dad around here. My mom was an only child, and she inherited everything from my grandparents when she passed. Most of it came to me, though. She left some for my dad as well. My dad's side of the family, like my grandparents and my uncles and aunts, they all live about 6 hours away, so day to day it's just us. Oh, and Moxie, my Cocker Spaniel, is doing great. She's loving the quiet around the house lately and seems really happy. I quote, I'll keep you all posted as things develop. Again, thanks so much for the support. It means a lot to know I'm not going through this alone. I had a sit-down with Amy. That's not her real name. The lawyer who managed my mom's will this past Saturday. I wanted to clear up any confusion about the will and see if my dad could potentially challenge it. Amy showed me a couple of crucial documents that both my dad and I had signed previously. These documents were basically our agreement acknowledging what was left to each of us, and a promise not to contest the will at any point in the future. Amy also advised that to keep things on the level and avoid any unnecessary legal headaches, it would be wise to give them a 30-day notice to find a new place and move out. With this new information, I felt more secure about where I stood legally, which was a relief. But of course, the drama didn't just stop there. What was supposed to be a quiet dinner between my dad and me ended up being anything but instead of the private chat I had envisioned. Steph and the twins decided it was the perfect time to join us. turning the whole evening into a much bigger affair than planned. During dinner, I decided to lay everything out on the table. I explained that I had spoken to Amy and brought up the details about the house and other related legal matters. I mentioned that they had 30 days to sort themselves out and find another place to live. Steph immediately tried to jump in and object. She seemed ready to argue her point, thinking maybe she could persuade me to change my mind. I wasn't in the mood to drag this out any longer than necessary, so I cut that short. I told her plainly that some issues can't be fixed just by talking or going to family therapy, and that sometimes space is what's needed to sort things out. She suggested that maybe we just needed more time to get to know each other. But honestly, from everything that's happened since they moved in, it's clear they only act like family when they need something from me. I've had enough of the passive-aggressive maneuvers and the manipulative tactics, so I straight up asked my dad what his plans were. Was he going to move out with them, or did he want to stay? He seemed taken aback and asked if I was kicking him out. I clarified that I wasn't kicking him out. He was free to stay if he wanted, but that I wouldn't be maintaining contact if he chose to leave with Steph and the twins. Steph then stepped in, playing the victim, wondering why I was throwing them out of their house. I had to explain again that this house was mine, inherited from my mom. It appeared to astonish her. Maybe she had convinced herself that we were living in a house that belonged to my dad. Lexi brought up another point. She grumbled about the time of the relocation, pointing out that they were in the middle of finishing up their spring semester and that exams were just weeks away. I sympathized, but stayed strong. I answered with a faint smile. Well, you best start searching for a place quickly then. Yesterday, Easter Sunday, I decided to hold a little get-together at my apartment. I asked my boyfriend and his family, along with my two best friends, to come over and celebrate the day. My dad has been attempting to get in touch, begging me to spend the day with him instead. But honestly, the only family I feel like I have right now are my friends and my boyfriend's family. We had a really fantastic experience. Did an egg search. I had a large supper that felt really comfortable and was something I hadn't done in a while, along with some entertaining games. Moving on to the home things. I've been hard at work recording everything in the house that has a value greater than $500. To be sure we had everything listed precisely, I invited several friends over to assist with that. My partner is the only other person with a duplicate key after I replaced all the locks on the doors. I am aware that his middle-class upbringing makes my dad not very proud of him, but that's his issue, not my own. In addition, I hired an expert to establish a complete security system around the house and grounds. It is comforting to have that additional security. In addition, I have a scheduled appointment to discuss fixing and strengthening the fences and gate. Since I entered college, I haven't actually touched the fund my mother left for me. It was intended to aid with living expenses such as tuition and room and board, but considering the circumstances, I felt compelled to use it. I've put all the minor items in a safety deposit box and have securely stashed away all the key family photos and photographs. I also made sure that all important papers are safely stored in a fireproof and watertight safe that I keep in my room and that requires a key and a passcode to enter. I quote making a sincere effort to exercise prudence and heed the advice you guys have been leaving in the comments on my earlier blogs. I really appreciate all of your support. It's quite significant right now. I don't know why my dad is sticking with his new bride and her family instead of his own daughter. It aches. Since he's essentially the only family I have left here, I won't lie. Since I don't get along with his family, I intend to break up with him and his new family as soon as they move out. He can live with his decision since he made it. That's about it for the time being. If anything new occurs, or if there's any drama, which, let's face it, there most likely will be, I'll keep you all informed. However, I've come to terms with the fact that, for whatever reason, he values them more than I do. Once again, I appreciate all of your help and good remarks. Realizing I'm not alone in this is quite beneficial. 3 revisions. Once more, hello to all of you. I was by myself in the house 2 days earlier, going through boxes in the attic that smelled like recollections of mustard. Distractedly, I was going through some of my mom's old stuff, which was both a comforting and a painful activity, amongst piles of her belongings. I happened discovered her old writing desk, which I had never considered looking into. It was one of those massive old oak antique desks with many drawers and compartments. I found a bundle of letters wrapped with a fading ribbon buried away in the false bottom of a drawer I was tinkering with. The envelope on top was addressed in a handwriting that I recognized. I couldn't pinpoint whose curiosity ignited it, but it wasn't my mom's. I took a seat in the dust and took the letters out. They were signed with simply A.S. and addressed to my mother. At first, I was just perplexed. My mother included, nobody I knew had a name that began with. But as I went on, the background of these messages gradually revealed a dismal and unsettling picture. These were not amiable correspondences. They had a close relationship, replete with admissions and regrets. There was an obvious betrayal in the tone. The more I read, the more the name Steph started to make horrifying sense as the realization set in. The years-long correspondence described a deep connection that had soured. Particularly the most recent ones were laden with regret and sorrow. In her post, Steph talked about how their previous encounter had severely wounded my mother, for which she yearned for an opportunity to repent but was never given. The last letter, which begged for forgiveness for an unspecified but obviously serious betrayal, was sent about a week before my mom passed away unexpectedly. My pulse was racing as the ramifications of this shocking new knowledge began to sink in. When at last my dad did return home, I was a whirlwind of emotions. I showed the letters to him, the expression on his face upon discovering them in my hands. It was similar to witnessing someone's entire world come apart. He made no attempt to refute it. Everything just poured out. He acknowledged that Steph was, in fact, the letters S. When he was married to my mother, they had an affair years ago, following Mom's death. Eventually, he and Steph got back in touch and resumed their romance, which resulted in their recent marriage, a detail he refrained from telling me because he was afraid. That wasn't all, though. After hearing our argument, Steph thought it was appropriate to share her side of this bizarre tale because she was broke and living on borrowed time and money and had nowhere else to go. She acknowledged that moving in was not so much about asking for forgiveness as it was about survival. All of the extravagance and riches exterior was only that, a facade. Her bank account was a wreck. Her possessions took her life, an accumulation of debt, the twins as well. Having been lured into this house on the pretext of family togetherness, they were as astonished as I was. They felt taken advantage of, trapped between a new, unwelcome family dynamic and their mother's machinations. What does this mean for me now? My boyhood home, where I felt the closest to my mother, had turned into a set for lies and long-kept secrets. The betrayal still seemed as recent as it had been. The despair and rage were too much to handle. I informed everyone, Dad, Steph, and even the twins, for whom I had true feelings, that they had to find another place to reside. Their deadline was at the end of the month. Even if they are still there, the house feels different now, empty or in another way. I've been alone myself a lot, attempting to make sense of it all. How treacherous of Steph. The lie from my father. All of it is too much to take in. My question now is if forgiveness is possible at all, or if it's simply one more compromise in a long series of them. How would you pardon the unpardonable? How can you make peace with the man who deceived not only your mother, but also you? Regarding Steph, I am reminded of all that has transpired each time I see her. She seems to be surrounded by lies, and I find it difficult to weigh my desire to comprehend her intentions against the gravity of what she is doing. I appreciate your presence and the guidance and words of support you have given me during what seems to be the lowest point in my life. Every suggestion and comment that I've been reading has been helpful. It does, in fact, to understand that I'm not the only one who feels this way. To be supported by a community when it feels like my own family is disintegrating. What comes next, then? To be honest, I'm not sure. I have to learn what forgiveness looks like, whether it is possible at all, and how to move on from this. Any opinions or guidance would be highly valued. How would you respond to this? If you were in my position, how would you respond? I'm interested in hearing your opinions. Once more, I want to thank you for bearing with me during everything. Right now, your support means the world. Hello, everyone. Since my last post, things have gotten worse, and not in a good way. So get ready for a lengthy read. The level of tension in the house spiked. With Dad, Steph, and the twins packing to move out, it appeared as though things might finally come to an end. The appearance of peace, though, was fleeting, and there was complete commotion when I arrived last Thursday. I had gone for a lengthy walk in an attempt to decompress, something that I'm finding myself in greater need of these days. But considering the circumstances, I wasn't surprised to see a moving truck parked in front of the home when I got closer. Nevertheless, it was. When I entered the house, Steph was supervising movers who were taking care of some of my most priceless family artifacts in addition to their possessions, things that had been my grandparents' and were never intended to be outside of this home. Steph responded to my instant confrontation with what seemed like a slap in the face. She insisted that because they had to move, they should have been allowed to keep some of the furniture. I was shocked by the boldness. In an attempt to mediate the situation, my dad added some rubbish about wanting to save certain things to give their new apartment a more homey feel. Watching them claim fragments of my past and my ancestry as though they were choosing things out of a catalog was strange. Things quickly heated up. I protested that they had no right to seize anything that was mine, especially objects that carried such sentimental importance. The twins then joined in flinging accusations and insults, casting me as the villain in their warped tale. It seemed like I was in some odd parallel dimension where up was down and right was wrong. The movers were caught in the midst, not knowing whose directions to obey. I refused to back down and insisted that they empty the vehicle and return everything to its rightful place. Steph was enraged. With a furious face and a strong tone, she threatened legal action and asserted that they would be paid eventually. My already overwhelming aggravation and fury were compounded by the public humiliation that resulted from the disturbance attracting the attention of numerous neighbors. I'm sure the spectacle will continue to spark neighborhood rumors for several weeks. Eventually, my dad forcibly dragged Steph away and commanded the movers to stop, maybe seeing how out of hand things had gone. The harm was done, but they quickly fled, taking just their personal belongings. In the house, there were a lot of things that were unspoken, felt drier and colder. I observed the vehicle go. I was half relieved they were gone and half afraid of the silence they would leave behind. I'm currently sitting in my living room with the sounds of the day's turmoil all around me. Recalling the battle in every room makes it difficult to be at peace. Since they left, Dad has not returned calls or texts, and it makes me question whether this will ever be the end of our relationship. The twins' final remarks are constantly repeating in my head, serving as a reminder of the gap that has developed between us. I've been considering what to do next. It is obvious that legal defense may be required if Steph chooses to carry out her threats. I quote, "We've been searching for attorneys in case I need to protect my property rights or handle any other unexpected situations Steph may present. I know it's important, but the thought of hiring legal counsel feels like admitting things are worse than I want to accept. I feel so emotionally spent. I feel like I'm going through a relapse of grieving over my family. In what way do you grieve for living persons who have rejected you in favor of worldly possessions? The home seems too huge and too peaceful, and I can't help but stray around. I used to avoid certain rooms in search of a sense of normalcy. I've also begun to consider security. Perhaps it's time to install an alarm system or some cameras. I can't sleep at night because I worry that they could return and continue to assert their rights to what is rightfully mine. It's an additional expenditure and concern. But it has made me feel less secure, and there's the rebuilding after that. How to reestablish confidence, a feeling of place when it's been so severely damaged? More than ever, I'm missing my mother. She was constantly aware of what to do and how to bravely navigate life's choppy waves. I'm making an effort to remember the things Mom taught me, but at the moment, everything just seems too much. That's where I am right now. A less than homely feeling residence, a fractured and dispersed family, as well as an uncertain future. I would appreciate any guidance. Any advice you might have on navigating this situation. How can you get over being betrayed? If it seems like everything is broken, how do you rebuild? I appreciate you listening, for showing up, even if it's only via remarks and texts. I really thank each and every one of you. This community has been a lifeline. Hopefully, the next report will provide more positive news. Till then, be careful. Hi to all of you. Maybe, Just maybe we had reached the apex of this whole fiasco, I thought, after the last post with the moving truck and the fight over my family artifacts. I was very wrong. Things bubbled over right when I thought they would start to simmer down. As an alternative. Earlier last week, while I was still trying to get my life back to something normal, another curve was thrown at me. Apologies. We'll simply refer to it as complicated. I got this terrifying official letter that seemed like it belonged in a legal drama. Steph has made the decision to sue me, and it looks like my dad is on her side. The assertion that, as a result of their supposed mental pain and maintenance of my house during their short visit, they should receive a share of my fortune. It is absurd. They simply made my stress levels spike and gave me a headache that seemed to go on forever. I contacted my dad right away to ask him about the letter. There was a lot of quiet on his end during the uncomfortable chat. He sought to minimize the whole event, saying that Steph was just being theatrical and that when everyone had cooled down, everything will be okay. It seemed as though he was downplaying how serious the matter was. Perhaps he is simply too engrossed in his new romance to be objective. It didn't stop there, though. The twins, who had been notably quiet until now, made the decision to enter the battle. They began sending me a constant stream of SMS, all of them more accusing than the previous. They said I was destroying their family and took responsibility for their mother's anguish. It was astounding how bold they were. They even had the audacity to inquire about dropping over to get some neglected personal belongings, which strangely enough included a number of my mother's most treasured and expensive antiques. They have obviously adopted Steph's strategy of distorting the facts. The following day was even more unexpected. I heard a tap on the door and discovered Steph and my father there, unexpected and uninvited. They were trying to have this conversation, but Steph was talking most of the time and my dad was just nodding along. Steph was attempting to manipulate me into complying with their requests by putting on a lot of pressure. She described how difficult this was for each of them and made hints that my refusal to share the estate's wealth was irrational. My father hardly said anything, simply repeated Steph's opinions whenever he spoke. I remained firm. I informed them that, especially in light of the legal threat, they had no right to knock on my home and demand something. In reaction, Steph was irate and even more menacing, threatening to use their lawyer. The argument went on until I eventually threatened to call the police if they didn't leave. I experienced a strange mixture of relief and uneasy dread as I watched them leave. Even though this was my father, I felt as like I was staring at a stranger. I now put myself in a situation where I have to get legal advice, a move I never thought I would take against my own family. I can't, however, ignore Steph's aggressiveness or the possible legal implications of her assertions. It is exhausting, this defensive posture all the time, and instead of being a haven, it's making my house a battlefield. I've been looking for quiet moments in the midst of all this chaos. I attempt to bury myself in reading throughout the nights as a short-term stress reliever. Friendship calls serve as a bulwark, a reminder that life exists beyond the storm. But the truth is, I become nervous every time I hear a knock on the door. Every time I get a call from an unknown number, I start to fear more terrible news. We've been thinking a lot about how things came to be in this situation. It's obvious that my connection with my dad has changed significantly, maybe irreversibly. My idol, the guy who reared me, suddenly appears to have put Steph's relationship before his own daughter. I have to deal with the legal complications of their requests, while also dealing with sentiments of betrayal, which is a terrible pill to take. VA also been forced to consider family and inheritance as a result of this circumstance. My beloved home, which brought back memories of my mother and earlier generations, is now the subject of a court dispute and a disputed area. It serves as a sobering reminder that family disputes can occasionally extend beyond interpersonal arguments and include legal issues. Requesting your counsel and insights once more at this point. Has anybody else handled legal disputes inside the family, particularly those concerning estates and inheritance? What got you through it, and how did you handle it? We welcome any and all advice. Since my last post, Steph and my dad have been threatening legal action and saying they should receive a portion of my mom's fortune. A remarkable change of events occurred in the courtroom. Thankfully, the court rejected the case outright after seeing through the ridiculousness of their arguments. Having the court system confirm what I had been feeling all along, that their accusations were utterly baseless and absurd, was a big relief. That ought to be the end of it, right? Not quite, though. There were yet more shocks in life. Let's go back 2 months. The commotion had subsided, and I was starting to believe that perhaps I could at last put the family turmoil behind me and begin to recover. I had the shock of my life at that point. My dad unexpectedly shows up at my house, but he wasn't only stopping by. Everything he had was with him. Suitcases, bags, you name it. I was shocked beyond belief. As I stood there taking in all of his possessions, I couldn't help but feel both confused and worried. I asked him directly what had transpired. He appeared to be defeated, greater than any previous time I've seen him. Him informed me that Steph and him were divorcing. As it happened, Steph had been unfaithful to him. When he confronted her after catching her red-handed, she threw him out of their home. Considering all that had happened, I couldn't help but feel irony. It was shocking to see him this broken, though. Standing there, my dad appeared to be a shadow of the man he once was. He was almost humble in his apology. He requested if he might remain with me for a while, saying he had nowhere else to go. I'll be honest. I wanted to slam the door in his face because of all the suffering he had brought about. However, there may be another part of me that, before all of this chaos, still thought of him as my father. I had compassion for him. I opened the door for him. That first night, we had a lengthy, difficult conversation. He talked candidly about everything. How Steph's relationship soured after their honeymoon period. How he felt stuck in a marriage where true love was secondary to convenience and Steph's manipulation. He had a lot of regrets, particularly about his handling of the estate and me. This was a lot to take in after hearing. On the one hand, I was relieved that Steph could now see what was really going on. However, I felt betrayed and upset that it required this for him to see what I had been going through the entire time. With him here, the home feels different. There's a persistent uneasiness and a tension in the air. We were both attempting to figure out how to proceed while navigating this new dynamic. I've laid up certain guidelines for his visit, making it clear that it's only going to be short. If I want any kind of connection with you in the future, I also demand that you take us to family therapy. To process all the sorrow and betrayal, we require expert assistance. It's peculiar. You're aware? A part of me waits for the other shoe to drop and is wary. I'm wondering whether this is simply another cruel joke from life. However, a part of me wishes that perhaps this is another opportunity for us to make amends, to reassemble anything from the ruins of our history. In the meantime, my practical side is also quite active, in order to make sure that there are no unresolved legal issues pertaining to the lawsuit that was dismissed. I have been speaking with attorneys. In addition, I'm investigating ways to safeguard the estate and myself in case any unexpected shocks arise. I'm at that point right now, searching for a middle ground between being cautious and being hopeful, between closing my heart and opening it, just enough to allow for some recovery. I'm taking things day by day, and it's not easy. I appreciate your patience while I've gone through this crazy. Your guidance and assistance have been very helpful. I'm open to hearing from anyone who has experienced something like or who has advice on handling family reunions following such intense disputes. When trust has been so completely destroyed, how can it be rebuilt? How can you be forgiving of others while yet taking care of yourself? Until the next occasion, I'm wishing you all well and looking forward to many calm days.